Gaming is a shifting landscape, much like where I choose to record my videos. So that means that something that's a well-known and established fact could change by the next day. And over the years, one thing that has changed is RPGs. Especially our perception of the RPG. I invited my friend Shintai to discuss what exactly the implications are for the changes in RPGs and how they affect how we perceive the genre. So stay tuned and enjoy the Majora T-Cast, RPG Perception. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Majora T-Cast. I have a very special guest. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Daniel, but you might know me as Shintai on the internet.
That's a first for me. I didn't know your name was Daniel. So hi, Daniel. I'm Teddy.
Yeah, some people actually thought that Shintai was my real name, and I had to clarify, no, I'm not Japanese. I'm actually Hispanic.
Ah, okay. That's interesting. And Majora is actually not my first name. But it'd be a lot cooler if it was.
Well, given your love for the game, I mean, I don't think you would have minded.
No, I don't shut up about it. So
Hey, I love that game too, so I'm not going to complain if you want to talk about it.
Fair enough. It's all right. We'll save that for a different podcast. I invited you here today because I think you're very thorough and thoughtful when it comes to talking about our subject for the month, here on my channel anyway.
Thank you.
And it's not anything that's unique. It's not anything that's never been talked about before. But it's RPGs, and it's something that no matter how many times you talk about it, there's always something else to bring up about it. And thank you for joining me, first off.
Oh, no problem. When I listened to some other episodes of the podcast, I really enjoyed it. Like the one where you were talking about classic game room, especially. I really enjoyed that. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So let's hope this one lives up to the hype. So, man, where to begin? I actually wanted to start with something that's a little bit more creative, and I'm sorry to drop this on you, but this might be the $1 million question. I want you to customize yourself as any RPG character class.
Oh, okay. Well, if I had to pick a character class, I'd probably go for a Dragoon Knight, like Kain from Final Fantasy IV, because that jump attack is broken as shit. So I love that. Plus, I always find that like every character has a sword, and swords are cool and all, but the lance I feel is an underutilized weapon. So I would love to be a Dragoon Knight. A really cool ability. They also look cool, and lances I think are kind of not unique per se, but just like a more unique weapon than what we're used to in RPGs. So
still has that medieval feel to it too, so it's kind of classic.
Yeah, plus it sounds cool. Dragoon Knight. Like, come on. That's awesome.
That does sound pretty cool. I mean, even what is it? I'm thinking of like Panzer or
Panzer Dragoon.
Yeah, exactly, right. Panzer Dragoon. Why does that name sound so weird when I'm saying it? I guess I've never held it, so maybe that's why. But yeah, those games sound awesome just on the name alone.
No, yeah, I've never played them, but they always seemed interesting to me. I know that one of them is an RPG on the Sega Saturn, but I've never owned a Sega Saturn, so I've never played it.
Ooh.
I also heard they're like really rare and expensive, so
yeah, unless you go import, and then it's $20.
Yeah, but then it's in Japanese, and unfortunately, I can't read Japanese.
Yeah, it's a process. If I don't know. What I would suggest is because I've built up kind of an import collection. Is start light if you're ever interested in playing Japanese imports.
Okay.
There's because with the Japanese, right, it works with several alphabets. There's a one that's pretty easy to learn, and then there's the kanji, which is just brutal. But if you can master the basic one, the kanji becomes that much easier.
Well, I mean, I don't have any plans, but
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's just my tangent. I'm such a how would you say? I'm a big supporter of import friendly gaming because of just how much cheaper it is. And it's easier to collect, I think, especially online.
I've done a few imports here and there, on occasion. One of these days, I kind of just to own it. I want the original PS1 version of Growlancer, just because we never got that, and it always really bummed me out. We had gotten 2, 3, 4, and 5, but we never got the first game, and we never got the sixth game. And I believe the company that made those games got liquidated into Atlas. So
Why is that? Why is that so hard to believe?
what's hard to believe? That they got liquidated?
Yeah.
Um,
Is that what you said? Did I mishear that?
no, I don't think I said that. That's why I'm confused.
Let's go back. All right. So what did you say?
um, basically that you know that the company, I think their name's CareerSoft, that they after they made the sixth game, that they stopped and they just got liquidated into Atlas, and they were actually um, the ones that made the Devil Survivor games.
Ah, okay.
Little
Who
known
knows? I
fact.
mean, there's been the resurgence in RPGs lately. So, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
with that, I wouldn't lose all hope. Maybe on PSN someday.
Well, yeah. I mean, in 2017, we had gotten near Automata. We got, uh, I believe the 3DS port of Dragon Quest VIII came out,
Yes, that is
um,
correct.
and Tales of Berseria, which I very much enjoyed. So we got some pretty decent JRPGs in 2017.
Right. It's just been a phenomenal past 2 to 3 years because I think if you look back, even around the time of like the Dragon Quest games on the 3DS, it just seemed like we were going through a dry spell of RPGs. And I feel like they're coming back and they're hitting hard. As hard
Yes.
as AAA games, that's hard to assert, but they haven't been forgotten, I think, as a lot of people were so convinced.
I can say as a longtime fan of the Tales series, Tales of Zestiria was a big disappointment.
Mm,
And then and I was losing faith in the series. And then they released Tales of Berseria, and faith restored as far as I'm concerned. That that game to me was basically an apology, and apology was accepted.
mm. Is there a new
So,
one in development right now?
I think so, but they haven't said anything about it. They're, hush hush.
Right. Yeah, the only one I've played is Tales of the Abyss, and I was enjoying it, but
Oh, that's actually my favorite in the series.
yeah, I would like to finish it. It was as an introduction to the Tales series, I thought it was pretty good, and I'd seen complaints about it, about like the main character being kind of whiny, but I didn't really have much of an issue with it.
Yeah, that's a that's a big sticking point for a lot of people, and even for me when I very first played the game.
Mm.
After a while, I was like, "What is this dude's problem?"
Hmm.
But eventually, he goes through a lot of development, and I feel that the payoff is worth it. I do understand why some people were put off by the game by his behavior.
Mm.
But you aren't supposed to like him, and you are supposed to kind of deal with it until you see him redeem himself and substantially grow as a character throughout the journey.
Fair enough. I mean, you shouldn't have to like every main character ever.
Yeah.
In books it's the same way. A lot of characters will be flawed, and their flaws are what make them interesting. And I
I,
mean,
I'm
you
I
could
would
be
say I'm
annoying.
far less interested in liking a character as opposed to finding them interesting.
Hmm. So true. With that, I feel like, when we talk about the appeal of the RPG, it almost always comes down to story for the most part. Like it'll always be that the story pulls you in. So, what is it about an RPG story that makes it that appealing where that's the draw, whereas I feel like a lot of other genres tend to miss that?
One of the main things about an RPG that I think elevates its writing compared to other genres is the amount of time that you spend with it. So,
Mm,
first person shooters, you know, don't often have the best stories. And you don't play those games for very long unless you're playing competitively. Uh, Even something like, you know, Deus Ex,
mm-hmm.
well lauded for its story. But I don't even think Deus Ex is all that long either. And when you compare this to even like one of the shorter RPGs that you play, which would probably be around like 20 hours, I think that's a significant amount of time that you're spending with the characters. So the more time that you spend with the characters, the more you develop a connection with them. And not only that, but because the game mechanics for an RPG lends itself to be able to sustain the longer play time, that also allows the writers time to flesh out the characters, flesh out the world, and flesh out the story. So that doesn't necessarily always translate to a good story, of course. It does depend on the skill of the writers. But I do think that it does contribute because the more time that you are spending with these characters, the more time you familiarize yourself with them, and the more time you spend in that world and immersing yourself in that world, the more it becomes this memorable experience for the player.
I've been playing Etrian Odyssey lately, and the game's like minimal on story, really. It's mostly about characters. And I think you bring up a great point is that it's your journey with the characters. And in the other genres, the FPS, the action adventures, it's always about the shock value and the hype in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But even if a story is minimal in an RPG, it's very personal. These are characters that you created and you you grow along with them and you know how to develop these characters. And I feel like with the RPG, whether traditional or maybe a bit more modern, they offer you something that some of these other genres don't. And it might just be that with the audiences nowadays, they haven't really had that emotional appeal with the video games, and maybe they've been missing it, and maybe the games like the Persona 5s, or I don't know what else has been coming out lately. Um,
I
even
think
just
Cosmic Star Heroine was a
mm,
turn-based RPG that came out on Steam during 2017. I heard that one was really good. I haven't played it myself yet,
mhm.
but yeah, that one got a lot of praise.
Even just to stretch the genre a little bit, the Valkyrie Chronicles, they're impacting people to the point where they're asking for more.
Hmm.
So to me, I think that's what makes them so special.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't. I think there was a drought for a while, and I think it's nice that we finally have gotten some more recently, and that people are clamoring for them. People are asking for them.
Right.
You know, and you bring up Persona 5, and that's a game that was pretty successful. That's about as mainstream as an RPG can get without being called Final Fantasy right now.
Right. And it was going toe to toe with Final Fantasy even before they released. People were more excited about Persona.
I would say, however, that the people that were excited are people like you and I.
Right.
People who are in the know, people who are active in gaming communities, who really care and discuss video games. However, at the end of the day, Final Fantasy 15 sold much more than Persona 5. And that's because Final Fantasy 15, I guess there was something about it that appealed more to a general audience,
Mm.
while Persona 5 appealed more to the more core gaming audiences.
Mm. So, does the RPG then have a place with the core gaming audience?
I think RPGs will always appeal to people like us. Even people who may not necessarily like RPGs as their main genre. I think everyone who is really passionate about video games has at least one or two RPGs that they're passionate about. Like, there's one guy in particular that I really like his channel. His name is Joseph Anderson, and he's not a big fan of JRPGs in general. That being said, he loves Chrono Trigger.
Right.
He states that, like, even though he's not a big fan of JRPGs, he doesn't play them much anymore. He still loves that game, and in fact, Chris Avalon, who is Avalon, I'm sorry, who is the writer of games like Planescape Torment and Fallout New Vegas, a lot of the Fallout games. He's written, Fallout 2, and, you know, even he loves Chrono Trigger and Final
Mm.
Fantasy 7, for example.
I think games like that were. There's a phrase for this, but it's like they were period pieces, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that they're like a symbol of an era. And at that
Yeah.
time, the Chrono Triggers and the Final Fantasy Sevens were the state of the art games that were blowing people away. And I understand why they're still so nostalgic for so many. And even playing them today, I played Chrono Trigger for the first time last year, and I loved it. Do you feel like RPGs still have it in them to be state of the art?
I would say Near Automata was pretty state of the art in a lot of ways. Maybe not in terms of graphics, but I think the things that game did in terms of story and gameplay were very unique. I mean, it's a game that plays like a character action game similar to Bayonetta or Devil May Cry. Yet it also incorporated uh, shmup elements
Mm.
like like Galaga or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to the story, it was able to craft this really interesting narrative about existentialism, and it also framed it with this really unique story structure where you play the game up to a certain point,
Mm-hmm.
and then you play it again up to a certain point, and then the story continues after that, which I've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Usually a story route, you play the game to completion, and then you start again, and then you do different things in order to see a different story route. But this game has a story route, and then later lets you go back and then continue the story, which is, I'd say that's pretty state of the art in maybe not in the traditional sense of, like, you know cutting edge graphics or something like that, but
Mm-hmm.
in terms of innovation, I'd say so.
Fair enough. And when there's 7 generations of consoles, it's really hard for a lot of games to stand out. It's almost like I feel like I've been there, done that with a lot of the games I see announced and coming out. And it is things like that that really do make convince me that gaming still has a chance. That gaming is still going somewhere.
The gaming's only limitation, I think, are the imaginations of the people making them.
Hmm.
As long as we have interesting creators that have wide imaginations and have the ability to implement that into their games, I think gaming will always be around and will still impress.
So when was the moment that you were impressed in an RPG? Where the RPG just had you captivated?
The first time?
Anytime. First you
Anytime.
could think of.
First time I can think of. Um, I think it might have been Breath of Fire 3 on the PS1 because in that game you start off as a dragon and the main character you play as later can transform into a dragon form. But the very, very start of the game, he's just awakened in his dragon form. You, as the player, you don't know what's going on. You realize that the character himself doesn't really know what's going on. And you go around and you're in this weird mine, and people are like running away from you, running for their lives. And then when you, as the player, like have an option to try and say something, you're a dragon, so he growls, and people are running away, and it's this really incredible moment where like you as the player and you as the character and the character in the game are like completely on the same page, where you're just like going around, you're not really sure what's happening or what you're even doing, and you get into some fights with some of these people, and you have to defend yourself, and you have to kill them, and it's kind of a morose thing to think about
Hmm.
because you're just defending yourself, but these are just like workers who are afraid of you because you're a dragon, and they're trying to defend themselves as well. And then after that, you get captured and then taken away, and then you're on a train. I remember you're like stuck in a cage, and then you have to get yourself. You knock the cage off the train, and then that's when like the game properly starts. And I always look back on that like introduction to a game and just was really impressed by it because even as a kid, because I was like 12 or something when I played the game, and I just remember that really impacting me because it was I'd been playing games for a while. I've been playing games since I was like 3 years old, but I can't remember an introduction that like really gripped me like right from the start like that. And you know, it turned out to be like one of my favorite RPGs.
It's a Super Nintendo game, right?
No, this is a PS1 game.
Ooh. Ooh. I'm
The first two
confused.
Breath of Fires were Super Nintendo games, and I did play the first Breath of Fire. That was actually one of the first RPGs I ever played.
Hmm.
But 3 especially was what impressed me. Like Breath of Fire 3 is a phenomenal game.
It's a series I need to check out. I missed out on a lot of those classic RPGs. I didn't have a Super Nintendo growing up, and my sister got me a PlayStation 1, but the only games I had were like Crash Bandicoot, Warped, and a Pac-Man game. So my history with RPGs is a lot more limited than yours. It probably seems
It,
basic by comparison, but
uh, it's never too late to get into a good thing. You
no,
know,
and I always appreciate them. But I guess I had more humble RPG experiences. I guess I had the Pokemons, but the one that really drew me in was also pretty much just as simple, and it was Dragon Warrior Monsters. And I had no idea it was part of the Dragon Quest series, but when I found that out all those years later, it's like, wow, I've really been into this for a long time.
yeah, and I've never played that one. So you've got your own experiences, that I'm not privy to. But I did want to say real quick that some people lament uh, that they weren't able to get into something when it came out. Like a lot of bands, for example, like, oh man, I wish I had gotten into this band, this really great band, when I was younger. But I always just appreciate the moment when something that I appreciate clicks with me, or when I'm turned on to them, because whether it be a great band or a great game, the fact that you were able to get into it and experience it and appreciate it at all, I think is important, and not necessarily when it happened, just that it did.
Right. I think, yeah, I'm with you on that, and I do like that I have more access to everything now. I have more access to the RPGs. I can buy the consoles I couldn't play nowadays easily. In fact, I just stumbled on a SNES Classic. I love it.
Oh, that's awesome.
The thing I like though is that I have all this nostalgia from just back in the days that kind of fosters that appreciation. Like I know that because I like the monster taming games, there's a lot of games I want to look out for and that do resonate with me. So the SMT series and even the Persona games, while I have some flaws with Persona, they resonate strongly with me because I could spend hours doing Demon Fusion. Etrian Odyssey, that reminds me of Dragon Warrior 3 when I used to play it on my Game Boy Color. So I think it goes both ways. I love having had those experiences, at such an impressionable time of my life because they stick with me. And I guess my concern is that with the younger generations, I feel like, oh, they're going to miss these or they're going to have some different impressions of video games. But then I look to Pokemon, right? And as much as I've grown past Pokemon, it's actually a little encouraging to see that kids still play it. Because there is something not just charming about it, but something thoughtful about the entire process of team building and management. And I like that for as much as it's you can contest that Pokemon is not an RPG, that style of turn-based gameplay still thrives today.
I'd say Pokemon's an RPG.
Why would you say that?
I well, I don't know. Maybe some people won't like my definition of an RPG,
Hmm.
but to me, I think what makes an RPG it works on a scale, and what I mean by this, there's a reason why there are certain games that we say have RPG elements,
Hmm.
but are not full blown RPGs.
Hmm.
Like, one can argue Devil May Cry has RPG elements because of the orb system. You can use that to purchase new moves or upgrade your health, but nobody's going to be calling Devil May Cry an RPG because of that.
Hmm.
As opposed to Final Fantasy, where experience and leveling is a driving force of the experience. So I believe that the gameplay mechanic of leveling up, getting experience points, is one of the driving forces of what makes something an RPG. It doesn't necessarily need to be called leveling or experience points, but it needs to be a controllable variable in the game that allows the player to, in a sense, lower the difficulty, because that's essentially what you do when you're leveling up. You are lowering the difficulty of the game by making your character stronger, and it is a variable that you have some control over. So the amount of impact and the amount of systems in the game that have an impact on the overall experience, I think, is what determines whether a game is an RPG or not. And therefore, since in Pokemon, leveling up your Pokemon is a pivotal part of the experience, I feel comfortable in saying that Pokemon is an RPG. I know some people may not like that explanation because it leaves out a lot of what other people may feel makes something an RPG,
Mm.
but that is my definition.
It's well articulated too. I think mm, I would call it an RPG because I think it has the RPG mechanics, but it's not just RPG mechanics. It's your team, and you assign the roles. You assign the roles of the team members, and it's very vast. But To me, it has the staples. And if I look back in an old school computer style RPG, and it's not that I ever lived in the age to play them, but I've also played the Darkspire, and I know what they were like. And the Darkspire is essentially character customization and pushing through a dungeon, grinding towards your end goal. And Pokemon very much meets those staples. I guess where I start to draw contention is in that people are quick to say almost anything is an RPG. That I mean, maybe you could explain this to me, but the differentiation between Western RPG and Japanese RPG has been a hot topic of conversation for a few years. But I had never considered that there was a difference. Why is it that turn-based games tend to be called Japanese RPGs versus action-adventure games Western RPGs?
I think that's just a weird misconception.
Mm-hmm.
So, from my perspective, what defines an RPG, as I've stated, it comes down to, like, it's very mechanical, what I think. And whether we deem something like as a Japanese RPG or a Western RPG, I think that just comes down to the cultural influences of that game.
Mm.
Like, um, and typically if they come from Japan or a Western studio.
Mm.
Honestly, I think I wish these terms didn't exist. I don't think we should be saying JRPG,
I
Western
hate it.
RPG.
I hate that term.
We don't call a game a Western first person shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we do it for RPGs? It doesn't really make any sense to me. I also do think it's bizarre that people make the assumption that all JRPGs are turn based when we've been talking about the Tales series and those are action RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there are Western RPGs that are turn based. I remember there was a Lord of the Rings game that was turn based.
Mm-hmm.
So it's granted, you may say, like, oh, that's the exception, not the rule. I've played plenty of Japanese RPGs that have action based combat systems. Kingdom Hearts, all of the Tales games, Star Ocean, Infinite Undiscovery, like plenty. Now, I'm not my knowledge of Western RPGs is a little more limited, so I can't trail off a bunch of other titles, but I'm pretty sure there are other Western RPGs that have turn-based combat as well, and I just think that's people making assumptions about these types of games without actually knowing anything about them and just judging based on what little that they do know.
Mm-hmm. I think that was very well put. I've seen it the way that JRPG is tossed around as almost like how would I put this? As a way to kind of castigate the genre and say that turn-based games are Japanese and they'll never do well over here. And that's where I've drawn a lot of my contention. So,
I mean, Final Fantasy VII was huge when it came out.
mm-hmm.
And Persona 5 did really well as well. It sold a couple of million. I don't know the exact number, but like I do know it sold in the millions at the least.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and Pokemon consistently sells gangbusters. So I think that perception is pretty flawed.
Fair enough. The good thing I like that I'm hearing is that there is a positive light at the end of the tunnel. A positive light at the end of a tunnel? No. There's a bright light at the end of this tunnel for RPGs. And that they do have a future, especially on our home consoles. And, lately with our Switch and our PS4s, even the Switch in its year-long lifespan has been a home to RPGs. And I'm glad to see that.
Traveler coming out soon.
Right? And they're giving you demos beforehand. And then Atlas is just stepping it up. I love it.
I think Shin Megami Tensei 5 was also announced for the Switch, even though we
Yes.
don't have many details for it yet. I mean, I imagine that's going to be turn based since every other game in the series has been turn based.
Right. I don't think they'll do a drastic overhaul, but it does look really promising right now. Where do you see RPGs going from here? Turn-based or action?
I feel like the bigger companies, your Square Enixes, they're probably going to continue pursuing action
Mm-hmm.
because that's what, especially with the success of Final Fantasy 15. Uh, at the end of the day, money talks, and with Final Fantasy 15 selling something like 10 million, 15 million, something like that. I don't know the exact number, but it's being as successful as it is. That money is speaking to them and saying you need to make more games like this. However, the more mid-sized studios like Atlas, I think are going to continue making turn-based RPGs, and I also think we're also going to still see turn-based games from indie studios as well. Cosmic Star Heroine I mentioned earlier, that's an indie game, and that was also pretty successful as well. It also was praised, and I feel that turn-based still has a place. It will it be like how it was back in the day when Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VII hit and was these huge monster successes? I'm not sure, but I can pretty safely say that turn-based is never really gonna go away.
That's great to hear. And especially on my handheld, I love that I'm seeing 3DS still get that love. But we'll see where
Yeah,
it goes from here. The Switch may just yet sell me if they cater to the gamer in me. And I know my PS4 will always be home to plenty of RPGs.
absolutely.
With that, do you have any final thoughts about the genre?
Um, well, it's my favorite genre, so I'm just looking forward to seeing any new innovations that we can possibly see. I was talking earlier about the imagination is the only real limitation that we have for the medium. And I say that RPGs still have a lot of things that have yet to be explored. Even turn based combat itself has so many new and interesting ideas that are just left unlocked. And, I saw a little bit of that with Octopath Traveler. I thought its turn based combat had some unique ideas in it that I hadn't seen before.
Right. I remember you were thinking about your title for that one and how saying it's like a fresh take on the genre.
Yes, I would go as far as to say that like Octopath Traveler has the spirit of a 16-bit RPG with the attitude of a modern one.
Mm. I like
And
that. I like
yeah,
that.
and you know, I look back on games like Shadow Hearts that had the really cool combat system where you timed your button presses correctly and that would determine how much damage you would do. Or even like Legend of Dragoon, which had a similar thing, but you had to, you know, press the button correctly in order to lengthen your combo. So and it doesn't have to be even timing specifically. Like in Lisa, the Painful RPG, another indie RPG, um, you can put in certain button commands, and
Mm.
that will determine like different attack combos. So turn-based combat still has a lot left to offer. You know, it's cool that Dragon Quest loves to stay with the more traditional combat. That's totally cool. But I'd love to see more developers take more risks and experiment.
I agree with you. I think when you switch up the combat is when it becomes fun. I remember I loved Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga when I was young. Just because of the times button presses, it was a little more engaging, and it had wit. The story was funny. Like
Yeah.
the characters are bashing each other, and then Mario and Luigi talking in fake Italian accents, and it's even concepts, right? You don't see too many sci-fi RPGs, which is why I think the ones that you do see become these kind of like they have these cult followings behind them. The Torment, right? You said planets. What was it?
Planescape Torment.
Planescape Torment, right? When Torment Tides of Numenera came out, everyone was going crazy because they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's a rebirth of the sci-fi RPG." And it's one that I used to play back on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the throwback element, and then there's the innovative element. And when the developers have that imagination to cross the two, but not do so in too generic of a way, I think that's when they can really make magic happen.
Yes, I mean, Star Ocean 2, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is that's a sci-fi RPG that people look back on and revere, as they should. It's a great game. So and a lot of people also just automatically associate RPGs with swords and sorcery,
Mm-hmm.
but um, that's an aesthetic choice, and it's one that it does have an impact on the experience, obviously, but it doesn't have to be that way, as proven by Star Ocean and also games like Earthbound, which it's not swords and sorcery or sci-fi. It's kids with baseball bats and using psychic abilities and stuff. So um, I was actually thinking about, like, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a turn-based combat system that no one actually fought each other, but were actually just talking to each other. So like your normal attack, would actually you be arguing with someone, and that would like hurt their confidence. That could totally work. And then when you would get like more advanced like arguing abilities,
Mm-hmm.
that could be like that game's version of spells. Like there's so much creativity to be had with the setting, with turn-based combat and RPGs. Like it's insane. And I'm just hoping to see more like that kind of creativity in the future.
That's so cool, man. I was thinking earlier just about, I've been reading a little bit more lately. So I've been thinking like what books would work well as video games, and then I just thought to what I read, and you really don't see in in a good book, you might not see any violence. You might see like one or two scenes. So then my instinct tells me, "Oh, this wouldn't work as a video game." But maybe it would. Maybe there would be this kind of diplomatic uh, conversation between politicians, or maybe there would be the interplanetary, I don't know, travels. You know, Traveling could be half the battle. It could be an actual story, and
Absolutely.
I think there is a lot of uncharted territory that I would like to see covered and at least tried. And it doesn't have to be this big fancy project. There's probably a way of doing it, and it could be me too that maybe I haven't played enough RPGs to know that these kind of games exist. But I like that even I can imagine about what could be out there. It's a good sign for the genre.
Yes, every genre has endless possibilities, and I would say that again, the only limitations is what the creators want to do with them.
Hmm. Great point, and I think that's fair enough to go out on. Daniel, it's a pleasure having you. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know the man, the legend, Shintai, go check him out.
Thank you for having me. This was great.